Okay, so the purpose of this lesson is to go over the big ideas from investigation one. Okay, I'm going to have you do this by taking some notes. You should have purchased for class a a composition notebook that you're going to be keeping your big ideas in. Okay, so go ahead and take that notebook out. I am going to be writing the big ideas just on paper, just as a little bit flatter, but you should be doing it in this composition notebook. Okay, and here we go. Oops. Okay, so let's go ahead and title this AN for Accentuate the Negatives. That's the current book that we're in. Investigation one. Okay, big ideas. Okay, and you're going to want to do a nice job of writing down your notes because we will allow you to use them on the quiz that you're going to take over investigation one. Okay, here we go. So first big idea was how can you decide which of two numbers is greater when, okay, first scenario, both numbers are positive. Okay, so you've got two positive numbers that you worked with for a long time. How do you know which one is greater? Okay, so there's lots of different ways to tell. You could think about place value, etc. But from with our number line, what we've been doing, basically the larger a number is, the further it's going to be from zero on the right-hand side. So that if I have two numbers, the number further from zero on the right side of the number line. Okay, what if both numbers are negative? Okay, so I'm looking at two negative numbers. They would both be on the same side. That's zero if they're both negative numbers. So back here, which one would be the greater one? Okay, so the greater one is going to be the number closer to zero. Okay, so, and I know that kind of bugs people sometimes because, like, if I have negative 13 and negative 6, which one is greater? Okay, it's going to be negative 6 because it's further to the right. So larger numbers over here, smaller here. So the further you get away from zero on the left-hand side, the smaller the number. The further you get away from zero on the right-hand side, the larger the number. Okay, so how about if one number is positive and the other is negative. Okay, so I've got a positive number and a negative number. Which one's going to be bigger? Okay, well, every time it's going to be a positive. The positive is always greater. Okay, so part of what we learned in this investigation was how the number line is set up and how to think about which ones are greater or smaller based on the number line. Further to the right, larger numbers. Further to the left, smaller numbers. Okay, so second big idea in investigation 1. So what is always true about the sum of a number and its opposite? Okay, so let's say I had 10 and the opposite of 10, negative 10. What would the sum of those two things be? So let's say it goes up 10 degrees and then back 10 degrees, okay? Or let's say I've got -5 and then +5. If I go back to -5 and then back towards 5 to the right, the sum of a number and its opposite is always going to be 0. Okay, so opposites together make 0. Okay, and we also talked about that with our chipboard models. Okay, so that was kind of like the second big idea. Okay, how about the third big idea? Okay, so third big idea. When you add positives and or negatives, how can you determine the sign of the answer? Okay, so let's look at a couple situations and we'll kind of play around with the tiles too. Okay, so remember if I add some positives here, so let's say I've got +4 and then I add +2, what kind of answer am I going to get? Okay, so let's just look at a scenario. So I'll write down kind of what happened over here. So if I have +4, so like 4 black chips, and I add +2, 2 black chips, what's my total going to be when I sum those together? Okay, do you see I've got a total of +6? Okay, so I should know that if that will always happen. So 2 positives added together is always positive. Okay, so and I can kind of see that with models. When I had 4 positives and I combined it with 2 more, okay, I ended up with all positives. Okay, all right. How about if I have 2 negatives? So let's say I've got -5 and I add -2. What's this going to be all together? What's on my chipboard? Okay, so it should just be -7. So, okay, so let's look at that in words. So if I've got -5 plus -2, how many negatives do I have all together? So these 5 and these 2, I should end up with -7. Okay, so 2 negatives is always negative. Okay, so if I had 5 negatives and then 2 more negatives, so I got a total of 7. Okay, so if they're both positive, then it's going to stay positive. If they're both negatives, the total sum is going to be negative. Okay, so how about if I have negatives and positives? This gets a little trickier. Okay. All right, so let's kind of look at this again. Let's say I've got positive, say 4, and I had -1. Okay, so I've got a mixture of positive and negatives. Okay, so what we kind of talked about with the chipboard is that these basically make a zero pair. So I'm left with just positives, okay? So those paired up. So it's going to depend when I have positives and negatives. It's going to depend on which one I have more of, okay? So let's just draw this model now. So let's say I've got, so what was it? 4 positives plus 1 negative, okay? So I paired up this set right here, so I was left with positive 3, okay? So, all right, so let's just say, drawing the picture so that I can remember this, I had 4 positives, okay, and I had 1 negative. Well, this made a zero pair. That's how I was left with positive 3. Okay, what if I had, let's reset this again. What if I had, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 negatives and then 2 positives? What kind of answer would that be? Okay, so let's say I've got -6 plus +2. All right, let's look at some of the pairs we could make. So that makes 0. Remember how we talked about earlier in our notes? That opposites make sum to 0. So those both make 0. So I'm just left with -4. Okay, so let's see. I had 6 negatives by drawing and 2 positives. Well, these pairs end up making 0. So I was left with -4. Okay, so if I have negatives and positives, so if you have negatives and positives, it's the sign, oops, sorry. It's the sign of the type of number you have more of, okay? So then you should just be able to say, all right, well, if I had -100 plus 10, is it going to be positive or negative? It's going to be negative because I've got more negatives with -100. If I had 32 plus -2, it'd be positive because I've got more positives than I do negatives. Okay, so that was that big idea. Okay, so and then one more big idea. Let's write this down. It's number 4. Okay, and we're going to develop the kind of more of the subtraction rules. But one of the things just getting us there was something that we were supposed to notice. So if you are doing a subtraction problem on a chipboard, and the board does not have enough chips of the color you wish to subtract. What can you do to make the subtraction possible? Okay. So, and I think the big idea here is with this is that you can always add 0 pairs, okay? So what's the worth of this board right here? 0. How about now? Still 0. How about now? Still 0. What's the worth of my board now? Just positive 1, because all of these are zeros. Okay. There's that one. Okay. What's the worth of my board now? Just -3, because all of those are zeros. Okay. So you can add a 0 pair whenever you want, and it does not change the value of the board. Okay. So we're going to say add a 0 pair. Okay, so you can always add a positive and a negative pair, which is basically just a 0, and it's not going to change the value of the board. So that's the end of our notes. Put them in a safe spot.